Greetings, friends. I'm coming to you to share some thoughts with you about this ship behind me. As many of you know, Rivers and I lived in Connecticut for 33 years. 3 of those years I was stationed as a chaplain at the Coast Guard Academy in New London. Within the last 30 years, I served a church in Westport, Connecticut. And just east of New London was a town called Mystic. And there was a seaport there where a replica of this ship, the Amistad, was home ported. And it became a national memorial site representing an act of freedom for a group of Africans that were brought over to Cuba and sold into slavery. And as they were being transported to another plantation in Cuba, there was a riot on the ship, and these 44 African slaves were able to take over the ship, and it was found adrift by the U.S. Navy off the coast of Long Island, New York. The tip of the Long Island is called Montauk. And then the U.S. Navy took the ship to New Haven, Connecticut, to the port, where a trial took place, and this was during 1839. Now, to give you a closer look at the ship, I want to show you this model that my son made for me that he saw in Mystic and bought and assembled for me. So take a closer look. I want to show you this replica of the Amistad ship that my son put together for me a few years ago. And I just want to give you a little view of the detail of the work of this. It's just an exquisite ship. You can see up here. Here's the Amistad, the name. The Amistad. And this was a slave ship that my son assembled, and with a great detail and workmanship. And I have it in my office here because it's not only spectacular, but also because it reminds me of the history of our nation, which had some ups and downs, but certainly prevailed. And at the end of the day, was able to proclaim the great freedom to this group of slaves that was on this ship, set free at the Supreme Court level in the United States during the 1840s, the Amistad. For scale purposes, this model, the original ship was 120 feet long, and the replica was built between 1998 and 2000, and now sits in Mystic Seaport. But a little bit of the history on this ship. Those 44 slaves were taken to New Haven, where they were tried in court. There was a scramble between the U.S. government, State Department, the Queen, the 11-year-old Queen of Spain, who wanted the ship back. Also, the U.S. Sailors that confiscated the boat off the coast of Montauk, and a fourth party were the 2 guys on the ship that survived the mutiny. So there was a trial in New Haven in federal court, and the 44 slaves prevailed. And then President Van Buren didn't like the outcome, so he appointed another younger judge to give a different verdict. And at the end of that second trial, that younger judge found in favor of these African slaves and wanted to send them back to Africa. So then Van Buren saw that this was going to have some political cost to him, to the southern states. And so Van Buren, the president, appeals this to the Supreme Court, which was 9 members. And so there was a man named John Quincy Adams who had been a president in the United States. He was the son of John Adams, the second president. Well, the former president, John Quincy Adams, went back into the House of Representatives, where he served the state of Massachusetts, and was asked to represent this case before the Supreme Court, where he argued the case for freedom. And at the end of this Supreme Court case, 8 judges out of 9 voted to send these men back to Africa or keep them in the U.S. But the long and short of this was, it was the first test of freedom, for total freedom for our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You know, the freedoms that people have, the freedom of speech, religion, worship, but also just to be free. And it was seen by the framers of the Constitution to be an inalienable right, that we all have the right of freedom under God. And the founders, of course, of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and so on were all God-fearing men and wanted to put this under the context of these rights were given by God to people. And so it's an important case. It prevailed. These men were set free, men and women. And due to this decision in really 1839, of course, 21 years later, there was a civil war, and the ultimate abolition survived, and there was freedom. This movie, the Amistad, is just great. And I watched it the other day, and I thought about this model that I have behind me. And it's not only a great model that my son put together, but it also stands for freedom. And we all appreciate the freedom we have in this country, the great United States of America. And I also greatly appreciate the freedom I have under the cross of Jesus Christ, crucified and risen. And it's important to understand that we are all free from sin, from death, from hell, by faith in Jesus Christ, who died on the cross and rose to give us everlasting life. And there's a great account in the movie about a Bible being given to one of these men in prison, and how the gospel, through pictures, through illustrations, witnessed to him about Jesus, the life of Jesus, the birth of Jesus, his teaching, his healing, his death, resurrection, and ascension into heaven. And it's interesting that the interpretation of that was so powerful just through pictures to share the gospel with this man who shared it then with others in prison with him at that time in New Haven. But it's a great movie, The Amistad. I would recommend that you watch it, enjoy it, and just learn a little bit of history about our great country and the framers of our Constitution and the power of the Supreme Court. You know, the other nations couldn't understand our court because they thought if you're a ruler and you can't control the court, what good is the court? Well, our country is set apart, where the court and the judicial and the executive branches all have a role. But ultimately, the Supreme Court decides the law of the land, as it did in that case in 1839. All right, so listen, if you want to reach out, hit the comment button on Facebook or Instagram, or go to my webpage, paultiskeyministries.com. Hit me a prayer request. I answer all those. I get them in every day. And I want you to know that I'm doing this for you. Also, that YouTube page, where all of these, over 400 videos are there for your perusal and hopefully blessing. So I hope that this has been helpful. Reach out to me. I'll reach back to you. So go in peace, my dear friends, and serve the Lord. And all God's people said, amen.